to all fellow science fiction fans. My name is Mike Burns. I live in northern Delaware, and I'm here today to put on a little YouTube video about this finished glass hand prop from the Demon with a Glass Hand episode in 1964. I want to explain a little history of this, one. Number two, for those who wish to get into the endeavor of making one of these, the do's and the don'ts, the things I found along the way, which were many issues with it. And then three, as a little bonus at the end of the video, show you my personal collector room in the house. There's one room dedicated totally to sci-fi collectibles, probably somewhere in the vicinity of $200,000 to $300,000 worth of very valuable collectible sci-fi things that are very, very rare and extremely sought after. But number one, the glass hand prop here has been a endeavor of mine for many, many years. Back in 1963, when the Outer Limits first started, I was 6 years old, and knew at that time that I was going to be a dedicated sci-fi fan. Back in that era, there were Time Tunnel, there was Star Trek slightly afterwards, Doctor Who aired in '63, but it was the '60s were a lot of science fiction type of shows. And the Outer Limits ran for 2 years. The most famous episode of the '49, done by Harlan Ellison, was Demon with a Glass Hand with Robert Culp, Arlene Martell, and Abraham Sofer. And the prop, as you just saw in the previous little clip, is a glass hand, has a computer for a hand, and many, many sci-fi aficionados have always wondered what happened to it. It disappeared off the face of the planet. Some speculate that it was thrown away, which is what I believe happened, because in the episode the fingers are bent back, and back in that era they didn't really have, they weren't thinking about selling costumes, props to recoup some of the profit. Nowadays it's a commonplace thing to auction off movie and TV show props, all kinds of different articles that were used in the TV show and the movies to recoup some money. But back then they just tossed things away. They really had a regard at all for saving things. And the most evident of that is in the Doctor Who series. There are still episodes of Patrick Troughton which have disappeared off the face of the planet and are incomplete because nobody decided to save things back then. So there are those that believe that the prop ended up in the garbage and is someplace in a landfill in California. There are those that believe that the prop ended up in some collector's house back in that time, who nobody knows yet and nobody's revealing that they have it. But it's often by sci-fi aficionados wanted to be duplicated, wanted to be remade. You can't buy this as a model kit. And ever since I was a kid, I've always wanted to do this. Back in '63, again, I was 6 years old, I would be so dedicated to the sci-fi shows and so involved in it that I would actually bug my dad to buy a 3-pack of audio cassettes, 60-minute long, from the Woolworths when he was coming home, so I could audio tape each show off the cheapy speaker and off the black and white TV set we had in the house. And I would collect all of them that way and have them at least on audio tape. Nowadays, of course, there's DVD, Blu-ray, and easily accessible through the internet. But the prop disappeared. And with a side note of that, I want to thank the RPF, which I believe stands for Replicated Prop Forum, which I'm a member of, who have a forum out for the glass hand prop. And I posted it on there, as I'll be posting this link to this video on there also. But again, back in '63, '64, Projects Unlimited did most of the props. They did most of the props for Star Trek also. And Wu Chang was believed to have been the one that created this. And again, it just poof, disappeared off the face of the planet. And those who are sci-fi aficionados always wondered what happened to it and wanted to get a copy. So I've got probably the closest one right now. This is August of 2020. Just completed this. It took me several months to do. And in starting into the do's and the don'ts for those who want to create it, I ran across things that I had to change at the time, things that had to be modified, things that had to be thought through. Fortunately, being a very spiritual person, my spiritual guides and my guardian angels came through and kind of gave me the inspiration of things as I needed to discover how to do this or how to do that. It came to me almost instantly as if it was channeled. So I had no problem in doing this as problems arose. It just became tweaking as I go. Now, the first thing, some people think that this was done in a mold, and the way I did it was have a rubber glove hung upside down, and we filled it, my daughter and I, with epoxy resin. And the reason I believe wholeheartedly that this was done back in the 60s with a rubber glove as a mold is that the average person's hand has a line, an arcing line going across the four fingers, so that all four fingers, the base and the knuckles, are on the same plane of reference. And in rubber gloves, this little finger is down lower on rubber gloves, and it is also in the stills from the show down lower in the prop. So I believe, and that's not what happens with people's real hands. So I believe it was done with a rubber glove, number one. Number two, there is a rod, which I'll be showing you in just a moment, in the thumb, a metal rod at an angle, which looks like it was put in there to push the thumb angle out, since most gloves have the thumb inbound, although I came across ones that are ambidextrous for use. This rod looks like it was pushing it out into the plane of the other four fingers. But I believe wholeheartedly it was done with a rubber glove. The first potential pour that I did to test things was done with an orange nitro glove. You don't want to use latex. Epoxy resin sticks to latex, but nitro's are rubber and it doesn't stick so much to rubber. But this is the original pour just to see how it went out. And I discovered some things. Number one is I didn't like the springs. They were too short and they were dark. But in pouring, the weight of the epoxy made the glove, which normally looks like this, splay out, which is how the original prop is. So it forced these fingers outward. Now this one, I'm not that happy with it because there's some tweaky things at the very end here that didn't come out. This little finger should be splayed out more, the thumb should be out more. And I'll describe to you why that didn't occur in just a moment. But another reason I believe it was done with a glove is if you look at the episode just before the opening credits and theme song for the show and such, there is a moment where a character by the name of Breach is captured by our hero, and he has these very thick black rubber gloves on. And back then they were hard pressed to spend money in any direction they didn't have to, because the shows were done on a budget. And I believe that was probably a byproduct of Wu Chang trying to find out what gloves used, and that may have been very likely one that they used to make this prop by turning it inside out. The problem I ran into initially with this is that I used a low mill glove, something around 8 mil thickness, and it stuck tremendously. Even though I used, in recommendation, you turn it inside out and you spray it with a mold release, which is the silicone mold release, and it didn't do diddly. And I had to actually grind the rubber glove off the all surfaces. So that's one of the things I found. And consequently, when I came to doing this one, I went up to about a 15 mil glove, which did a couple of things. Number one, it eliminated creases, because if you go in the mold and you're making this with a low mill glove, it has creases embedded in the rubber of the glove, and it comes out in the mold. There are high points of the epoxy that you have to grind down and low points you have to fill. But if you go to a 15 mil glove, which is what this is, it's almost smooth peel off easier because you can get a grip on 15 mil, and on a thinner glove it just snaps as you go to pull it off. Between this trial and the finished product, I also discovered that the mold release that is best used by everybody is Vaseline. Just regular Vaseline you buy over the counter. So you turn it inside out, you coat it with a thin layer of Vaseline, let it dry, hit it again, hit it a third time, and the rubber came off much easier off the finished product. The only problem is the blue from the color of this glove embedded in the epoxy, and I had to grind it off with a sander to find the clear, but nonetheless it turned out well. So 15 mil gloves works best, and if you go up in that mil, 15 mil and higher, most of the thumbs are here because their gloves are usually used for doing your dishes in your sink, ones that classically are the light blue and things. So you need the thumb to be outward, and I just find a 15 mil glove that is ambidextrous, so that there's no right and left hand. The thumb is definitely on the side, and that worked best. And then using Vaseline as a mold release worked excellent also. So that was one of the reasons I thought that instead of doing a different type of casting, they used a filled glove, but they probably used, instead of epoxy resin, they used acrylic, which has a shorter drying time, or a longer drying time, and allows you to move things around, which I'll explain in just a moment. The wrist piece in the internal components of the glass hand is an old squeegee handle, which you just can't find, but there are ones nowadays that you can see that are similar, very similar in the look and the principles. They're just rounded and they don't have a hinge effect, but the principle is the same as to grab a squeegee edge, and it has a button, the black button there to lock it down, which I'll show you in just a moment. But that's kind of the dynamics of how all of that went. Now, as far as the internal components go, insofar as the internal components go, which is the tricky part of this casting, the wrist piece is an old squeegee, which you can't find, the old squeegee, and that's this piece here to here. So this was cast by myself in wood, and I ran into a problem with that with the casting, because as it cured, I read about